Thank you. I'm really pleased to see such a large audience today. This is just great. We're going to talk about a couple of different things here. Let me just start by saying that what we're going to give a presentation in 3 parts. I'll give the first part talking about salmon. Andy will talk about some of Redmond's approaches, and Abbey will talk about regional guidance from commerce and ecology. Okay? So I talked to you this morning about some of the work we've done on salmon, and probably a lot of you know who Jennifer McIntyre is. How many have seen her give a talk? Or a lot of you. Jen was my former postdoc, and then I was slick enough to be able to hire her as our latest hire as a new faculty member at WSU Puyallup. And she's done some great work on the toxicology of stormwater pollutants. And one of the things that you find is that stormwater, the pollutants in stormwater vary tremendously in time and space. Okay? And that makes it very challenging to do any work on that and figure out what's really going on. Toxicologists hate this stuff. They only want to look at effects of one chemical at a time on an organism and in dose response, right? So, all right, so are you all right then? Try enter. I can try enter. All right, so the thing is, this is a complicated situation, and as I mentioned in my talk earlier, here are some of the species of salmon that we have in the Pacific Northwest. You could also probably add bull trout. And what about kokanee? Aren't those supposed to be salmon? But they're landlocked. But then are they really salmon? Because they don't go back out to the, it gets, you know, it gets a little weird. Anyway, we all know this too. Our salmon populations are in great decline. These are really good graphs that Andy came up with that show the decline of these 3 species, coho, chinook, and steelhead. And we're in dire straits. Like I said, there are a lot. I think it's 29 now populations that are either threatened or endangered. And if you don't know much about salmon biology, you might want to look into this because they have quite different life history strategies. Different residence times in freshwater versus salt versus estuary, different time out in the ocean and all these kinds of things, and where they spawn is very different. So for example, coho and chum, by the way, are lowland spawners. Why is that important? Because they come into the urban areas, for example, around cities where we have streams to spawn, and they stay there. So what does that mean in terms of exposure, right? They're being exposed to the stormwater pollutants, whereas chinook are upland spawners. A lot of them go up into the mountains. They go way up the Columbia River. They go all the way to the Snake River. So they're traversing through those areas. They're not spending a lot of residence time in these really polluted areas. So that's important because when we talk about poisons, they always say that there's an old adage, it's from Paracelsus back in like 3 AD. No, I'm kidding. But anyway, it's a long time ago. And he's considered the father of toxicology. And it's the dose makes the poison, right? The amount. But that also has to do with exposure. If you're not exposed, you're not going to get sick, right? Now, what we do know is this. In the areas where people live and work, in other words, in our suburban and urban areas, a lot of our healthy habitat is gone. And I mentioned earlier today the 4 H's, and the one that the salmon biologists talk about the most is habitat destruction and disruption. Especially clear cutting of forests, put in homes, things like this, removing all the trees in an area is a horrible thing for salmon because it silts out the water. Salmon need a gravelly bottom to make their redds, to protect their eggs. When you get a silt bottom on a river or stream, you're in big trouble. The salmon are in big trouble. It also raises the temperature of the water. And salmon need really cold water. We have a big salmon lab at our center, and that water is cold. I'll tell you, we have to keep it very, very cold or the salmon don't do well. So what does that mean in terms of global warming? You can connect the dots. If we warm up, it could be really bad for salmon as well, which with all the other stressors we have, it's not a good situation. So, enter. We know this. Urban stormwater runoff is toxic. And that may seem like a silly thing to say. But the reason I bring that up is that we didn't know how toxic or what the magnitude of this was until very recently. If you go to the literature and look around, there have been a few studies here and there. Sometimes it's not even with stormwater. It's like artificial stormwater or someone does something or another. We've looked at this in detail now, and what we found is quite disturbing. Stormwater is, for the most part, in urban areas, quite toxic to not only salmon, but to other fish species and a whole suite of aquatic invertebrates. And you end up with all kinds of abnormalities in fish, for example, right? We get Small eye syndrome, for example. You get blood clots, you get deformed tails, you get heart malformations, which are really extreme, and those are usually due to polyaromatic hydrocarbons. We get this, if you notice on the top, that's filtered water, and it shows that that's filtered stormwater, and we have unfiltered stormwater. You can see differences in the cranial veins up there, and you can see an abnormal tail development. So filtered, what does that mean? That means running the water through a rain garden. So I've said all this bad stuff about stormwater, but the good news is we can mitigate that or reduce the level of pollutants to a point where they're not toxic to salmon, and not only salmon, but other organisms as well. And that's a key point. So when we talk about rain gardens and even permeable pavements, we're working on that too, and we know that our permeable pavements remove a lot of pollutants as well. The mechanisms behind that and how that happens are complicated, but it does work. And we're going to look at some toxicology on that very soon as well. Or we've already done some, but we're going to do more of that. All right, so you've probably all heard about pre-spawn mortality. And this is a widespread issue, again, like I said, in coho. It doesn't happen in chum, and at times they spawn at the same time of the year in the same streams. So it's quite disturbing to see this, and it's quite odd to see coho come in and then keel over before they spawn and die. But what's even weirder is the chum right next to them don't. All right? So Dr. McIntyre is working on that and has come up with a lot of the physiology behind why this is happening. And what this tells you is something very important, and that is you cannot use, and I've written many, many papers on this, by the way, one in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences a long time ago, on the issue of surrogate species. And what I mean by that is if you have data for rainbow trout and you're using that to protect other salmon species, it doesn't work. I'm showing you right here that chum salmon don't have this effect in the same water body at the same time because there's differences in the physiology of those animals. So anyway, we're trying to solve these problems, make life better for salmon and for us, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, John. My name is Andy Rheaume. I work for the City of Redmond Stormwater Utility. And so that was one part, is the salmon piece, and so we're going to cover the other two parts, which is stormwater regulations as well as planning for growth. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay. So no surprise to anybody in this room, but development requirements changed for stormwater regulations in about 2013. So we're not even really seeing the impact of that yet. What we do think as a community, at least I hope, is that the new stormwater requirements that we have are enough to recover streams when the entire area that drains to that stream that's urbanized is outfitted with the stormwater controls. I hope that made sense. But we have a long, long ways to go from here to get there. The important part to think about is that any other utility, whether it be a water supply, a wastewater system, a transportation system, a mass transit system, they all have plans, right? And they have multi-billion-dollar plans that they've created, and they're implementing them, and they're planning to have them fully implemented by a certain amount of time. In stormwater, we don't do that. We have a regulatory requirement that's going to cost billions of dollars. We do not have plans for how that's going to play out, and we can't really tell anybody for sure. But if you look at least in King County, it's going to take 75 to 100 years before we actually get to our goal. And so I challenge us as a community that that's not a good thing. Anybody that has a multi-billion-dollar plan has some backing. We don't even have a plan. We just know it's going to cost a lot of money, and we got to change that paradigm going forward, or else we're going to be hurting. I'd hate for the day when the legislature asks, let's say 30 years from now, well, show us what you guys did with that money, and we're kind of just standing there. Well, we got part of this watershed retrofitted with stormwater controls, and this one over here, but we have nothing to show for streams that are restored in urban areas. We're going to be in a lot of trouble if that happens. Oh, there we go. I should just look up there. This thing's got 3 different things going on. So I touched on that. So it's tied to development. So we just basically follow development around. That's our plan, and we have them install stormwater controls. But again, by design, and there's probably a Doug Howie or somebody in the room, by design, every developed area needs to be outfitted with those stormwater controls for a stream to be healthy. The new requirement for LID hasn't really landed yet, but we're seeing a lot of concern about that from the development community. They were already upset about the stormwater vaults getting very big to provide the flow control requirement, and now we've tacked on another one, and that boot's about to drop, and hopefully we can use existing land uses or replace non-permeable pavement with permeable pavement, that type of thing, without causing a burden. But if you increase the amount of trees a developer needs to save, like from 10 to 15, they freak out. So we're going to have an interesting time here in the next 10 years, I think, trying to meet the new requirements. But again, they don't specifically target restoration of streams. So growth, this is how developers would like everywhere to be, because this is how they make a lot of money. But it's on purpose. So at least in the state of Washington, we have an urban growth boundary, and you cannot see it very well in that picture, but the next picture you'll be able to see it. But we're basically, we're trying to accommodate 1.6 million more people by 2040. That projection is probably low, especially if global warming happens as fast as it potentially could. We might be a refuge place for other places to come here because we have a drinking water supply that we plan. And that one's not much better for the urban growth boundary. But basically, we're trying to pack all those people into an area. And so the development needs to be very dense. And so stormwater, like we just said, takes up a lot of space. Like water supply, that type of thing, doesn't really take as much space as a stormwater system does. So we got to start talking with planners about how we accommodate both the population growth as well as trying to have urban streams that are actually healthy. A lot of people have concern. Right now, the health of our streams isn't very good. And if we don't address that and all the streams are dead, people are going to say, you just destroyed my quality of life. There's going to be ramifications to that. There's tribes that use those areas for fishing. So what Redmond did is we tried to address all three. We've been involved with salmon recovery for over a decade in the Y-Rate Salmon Recovery Council. 5 minutes, I think I should be good. Comprehensive plan, just like any other city in the state of Washington, you're required, a certain size city, to comprehensive plan your growth. And we decided that it's time that we start thinking about stormwater from a planning level. So we first started off with our regional growth centers, which, if you know what those are or not, that's where a lot of density is going to go. And we said, well, instead of just chasing it around development one at a time, let's build the system. And we did that in a couple places. It's very expensive, but you can recoup that money because you're allowing them to build to a higher density, and they don't mind actually paying for it. So they were going to have to pay for it anyways. I think that's kind of the punchline, is that with the stormwater regulations, you're going to pay for it one way or the other. If it's private development dollars or public development dollars, the private development, they're going to put it right back on whoever bought the property from them once they developed it. So it really comes down to, do you want to plan for it or not? So we did. And so we built a watershed plan. The first thing to do, we were lucky, we had a lot of data available, but you don't need a ton of data to do this. But what you want to do is try to figure out where you think you could restore some streams, because I think we need to know sooner than later if we actually can restore urban streams. You build facilities to improve those streams, and we're actually trying to measure if they work, which you don't have to do, but I think it's an important step for the region that we understand, like, okay, we went in and intentionally planned this system, we installed it, did it bring back the stream or not in an urban environment? And we also set up a system to make them, or help us, finance it. So we'll get into that just real quick here. But the important part is to understand is that we do not leave any streams behind, no streams left behind. But what we tried to do is we tried to prioritize which ones we're going to try to tackle first. Every single stream in the city of Redmond is impacted by urban development, and so we can't fix them all at once. We're guessing by 2060 we can maybe fix the 7 of the 20 small streams. We're talking 300 acres each or so. We're hoping we can fix those by 2060. And so it's a long-term plan. And our goal is in 100 years to fix them all, but that's yet to be seen. So this is just a quick little animation. So we retrofit an area, that's the green area, retrofit some more, and then all of a sudden that goes to redevelop, they pay in. They pay into our redevelopment, or the retrofits that we already built, and this is in a different watershed, so it drains to a different receiving water body. And I did it annoying, it just keeps going. And over time, you hope that you have the area that drains to the stream fully restored. And you could use development to help you pay for that. And it just keeps going. There we go. Okay, so implementing the plan, there's one thing to have a plan, there's another thing to implement it. So we implemented that, we developed the plan citywide. We said, okay, we're gonna fix these 7. So the first thing we did is we did some engineering. And so we have 2 different streams that we did the engineering. We're calling it the restoration plan, but we literally modeled it, located facilities, sized them, did all that stuff. Just a word of caution, if you are gonna knock down a house to build a stormwater facility, you better communicate a lot with the community or the neighborhood that house was in. There's other things you can do too. There's programmatic things that we're tweaking and adjusting just to see if that has any impact on in restoring the stream. Tosh Creek is another example that we built a restoration plan. The last piece is the paired watershed study. And what this is, it's funded by a lot of people that are in this room. A lot of cities paid into the stormwater work group, which then solicited projects. And we did one that we're monitoring streams that we're working on, streams that we're not working on now. And then we have a forested area that has streams that we're monitoring to see. So there's a base, what do we call it, reference, control, and then an application base. And the application ones we're trying to fix. And so over time, we're hoping we have our baseline data. Now we're starting to build projects, and we're going to see if what our efforts do in the stream. And that's it. And that's what happens when you grow salmon, feeds the whales.
Okay. Can you hear me? Good. Okay. Good afternoon. So I'll provide you with an overview of 2 recently developed documents that offer guidance on how to think about your stormwater management strategies in the context of your developed landscape. So first I'll talk about Department of Commerce's guidance document known as Building Cities in the Rain. And then I'll talk about Department of Ecology's guidance document known as Stormwater Control Transfer Program. Enter. Okay, so this idea came to Department of Commerce's attention as sort of a conversation that started out as, the Growth Management Act and these municipal stormwater permits are at odds. The stormwater permit regulations are really going to drive development out of our regional growth centers, out of our urbanized areas, and out into these undeveloped areas. And as the conversation continued, it really became one about how those laws and the permits can work together to achieve a common goal. And I should mention that Department of Commerce's effort to convene a work group was funded by the National Estuary Grant Program. And they were really working, the desired outcome of developing this guidance is to marry vibrant and compact urban centers with stormwater management techniques to get to clean waters, clean streams, healthy habitat. So the Building Cities in the Rain guidance document offers a stepwise approach to prioritizing watersheds for stormwater retrofits. It's intended to help identify the data that you need to inform your plan and the process and the considerations you should take into account while developing this plan. And the guidance document was a melding of the minds. So we had state regulators, federal regulators, local representatives from local governments, as well as environmental communities all together working on developing this guidance document. So why would you do this? Well, you can use the guidance from Building Cities in the Rain to develop a plan that helps to inform your elected officials or your public about the special and valuable resources you have in your community. It can inform your needs assessment for your capital facilities element of your comp plan. It can identify where you want to target your stormwater control investments. And it shows to potential funders that you have taken a thoughtful approach to your stormwater management strategies and could get you more points and get you actual dollars to implement your plan and stormwater investments. And then it can also inform other plans that you have. So TMDLs, cleanup plans, that sort of stuff. So the overall planning process that is included in Building Cities in Rain is that you want to establish your prioritization goals. So some of that could be supporting improved stormwater management, which can then improve your habitat and habitat restoration goals. It can also be used to support development which supports your regional growth strategies. You can use regional information. And if you're in the Puget Sound area, you may be able to use the Puget Sound Characterization Project, which provides an output of very coarse data that you can then refine with your local information. And also, the document talks about involving your stakeholders. So you really want to have these discussions with people that have a stake in what you're trying to do. So tribes, your public, watershed groups, those are the sort of people you want to get involved. And then ultimately, it can help you plan to where you want to install retrofits or watersheds where you really want to work harder at that. So the Building Cities in the Rain document is great because it breaks down the data and the information that you need to take on this procedure. So it breaks down the data into a couple categories. And it talks about fish use in aquatic habitat. And so some of the data that you're going to look for there is the percent of tree canopy that can help inform that, your BIBI scores if you have that, where you may have water quality impairments. You'll want to assess your watershed areas for opportunities to address flow control issues or provide treatment. So then you can use your percent impervious cover or land uses or the aging conditions of your existing stormwater facilities to help inform that piece. And then another piece is if you have an environmental justice or social equity issue. Those can be some tipping factors as to refining where your high priority watersheds are. Okay. So that was a very high-level piece of the Building Cities in the Rain. I recommend you all go out and read it. It's a great read. So now I'll talk about Department of Ecology's Stormwater Control Transfer Program. And so this came about while working with the city of Redmond on their plan. And Department of Ecology and Dettelbach, who I'll call out, who's in the room right now, really worked on this document. And as they're working through reviewing City of Redmond's plan, the brilliant idea came that we should write down what are these general principles of this program so that it can be replicated and we can tell folks what we're looking for when we approve a program. So the Stormwater Control Transfer Program offers an alternative program that allows for the limited transfer of flow control requirements from one development project site to another in a priority watershed. So it is an out-of-basin transfer. So to let the cat out of the bag, I'll just tell you what this means. So under the current default approach of the municipal stormwater permits, a local government must require a project to mitigate their flow and water quality impacts for the proposed project and mitigate the flow and water quality changes caused by the existing project site. Under the Stormwater Control Transfer Program option, a local government must require the project to mitigate for the impacts of their proposed project site at the project site and mitigate for the changes caused by the existing project at an alternative location in your high priority watershed. So in this way, instead of getting some correction of high flows at sites wherever development happens, where you're just chasing development around, you can focus the improvements to those watersheds that we think have the highest potential for rehabilitation, and especially for salmon or shellfish use. Okay. So the Stormwater Control Transfer Program, or the guidance, is it's a set of guidelines. It's not a step-by-step approach. It identifies the essential elements of an approvable program. And At its core, it's a program that allows municipalities to change where stormwater control improvements are made. So when I'm talking about improvements, I'm talking about going from the project site to the forested condition. It focuses on flow control because we know that this is a very important piece for restoring our factor for restoring our streams. And also, we've heard from some communities that meeting the flow control requirements is more challenging to get to that forested condition. So this offers flexibility to meeting that permit requirement. Okay, it's also important to note what this is not. So we are not changing the stormwater requirements. You still have to meet them. It's just that improvement piece gets to be located in a different watershed. It's not wetlands mitigation banking because we're not proposing that you can get to trash the creek and then make up for it somewhere else. And it's not an in-basin transfer program. That's something that's already allowed through the permit, or so is this, but this is something that's already explained through the permit. And you can think of like your regional facilities as that's your in-basin transfer program. And it's also not, it's not the same as the structural stormwater control program, which is required under the phase 1 permit. It's something different from that. So just to give you another high-level overview, the guidance has several sections. Section 1 talks about the overview, the general principles, the key elements, and then Section 2 is about the prioritization of these watersheds, which really takes from the Building Cities in the Rain effort. So we adopted almost all of what Building Cities in the Rain did into our document, into our procedures. And then it includes a section on monitoring, and then how to track your debits and credits for these transfers. So the principles is full attainment of your water quality standards, including protection and restoration of designated and existing uses. Again, we're trying to improve the hydrology of the stream. And it's worth noting that even though incremental improvements are being directed to priority watersheds, the stormwater control is being implemented at the project site itself, so like soil quality and depth or oil control, et cetera, those will also provide a modest lift at the site. So more principles are that we're trying to, again, target those watersheds where we're going to see an accelerated environmental benefit. The prioritization is based on science, so not just political will or other considerations. You're going to use science and data in a systematic process to really identify those areas. And it doesn't shield you from future permit requirements. So even though you've developed a plan, if a TMDL or a future stormwater permit comes out, you'll still be required to meet those things. And if you do go through this process, it's a plan that requires Ecology's approval. So it's so at the end of the day, you have Ecology's support for the plan that you're implementing and changing where exactly your permit requirements are being met. Also, very high-level overview of that document. So I suggest you go read it, and you can get more of the details. And I can help answer questions, too.